Hey guys, this is Khavrion here with another battle report. This is for round 2 of the Sectorial Cup by Vol SC. The Sectorial Cup is an infiNity league by Vol SC, with the only major significant quirk being that everyone has to play a sectorial. The idea behind only sectorials is pretty straightforward, and it is that there are some really powerful lists out there, generally in vanilla, whose mere existence it's kind of like a black hole pulling everything in their direction and warping the meta. Vol SC recently did a video on these, meta warping lists, which I think itself was based on a forum post. And the idea behind it at a high level is that the existence of these meta warping lists has caused infiNity to calcify and stagnate, at least at a competitive level. Thus, because most of these lists are in vanilla, if we get rid of vanilla, we get rid of most of these lists. Unfortunately, not all of the meta warping lists are in vanilla, and in particular, one of them is in Steel Phalanx. It's the big boy list, which if you've seen my channel, you've probably seen me play that list a whole bunch of times. That list capitalizes on some of the strengths that Steel Phalanx has in order to create something that is, meta warpingly good. And because Steel Phalanx is obviously a sectorial, that list would be legal for this event. Now, I am not running that list in this event. I'm trying to force myself a little bit outside of my comfort zone and experiment with a couple of things, specifically Atalanta and Hidden Deployment and the Agema. But the things that make the big boy list good are also going to be present in, the best Steel Phalanx units. This list will feature some of those Steel Phalanx units. And so even though I'm not running peak meta Steel Phalanx, the fact of the matter is that the black hole created by all of those units being so busted good is still dragging Steel Phalanx closer to being, sort of busted good itself. Having said that, it seems appropriate to talk about lists. I am once again running my double Agema list for the Sectorial Cup. It is a fixed list format, so I do have 2 lists to choose from, but throughout the entirety of the event, this is the list I'm going to choose. And what's going on here is I want to experiment with Atalanta in Hidden Deployment and an Agema marksman with a missile launcher also in Hidden Deployment. The Agema missile launcher is pretty straightforward. It is a trap card so that if you move something important and it sees you, it reveals, shoots the missile, and hopefully kills you. The experimentation is going to be, can I bring a lot of dudes with conventional smoke, especially these Myrmidons, and then count on throwing that smoke so that the Agema would then have a smoke cover. It doesn't actually work out that way in any of my games, but that's what I was thinking when I was putting all these Myrmidons and the Agema into this list. In terms of Atalanta, the thought was a little bit more complex. Atalanta is one of the few competent long-range guns that Steel Phalanx has, and if you're trying to look at things that can take care of, tags, or things that can throw smoke, or, mirror match Steel Phalanx, there aren't a lot of tools that can bring long-range firepower. Atalanta's pretty much the only one for the sorts of things that you would want Atalanta for. Thus, you want to bring her, and if you put her in Hidden Deployment, she stays really safe until you need to reveal her and take her shots. Of course, the other thing is that, she could reveal and ambush something if something comes along, so having her there is also nice. Thus, I'm experimenting with putting her in Group 1 in case she wants to use 10 orders shooting, a tag or something. Unfortunately, this ends up being a little awkward. Being in Group 1, she's eating up an order slot, which I would love to actually use on an order-generating model for someone like Orderos to run around and kill things. However, considering that this is the Hidden Deployment version and she doesn't have total reaction, I don't actually want to reveal her and get her on the board unless it's a really opportune moment. So she's kind of sitting there, taking up an order, not really being that useful, but also not being something that I want to reveal and get out of the way. If I took the total reaction version, I could just put her prone behind a box or something and she'd generate the order until I need her, but I'm taking the Hidden Deployment version, not that one, and so we've arrived at this problem. The last thing that's going on in this list, which I did talk about in my previous video, is that I have to trim a lot of the really good profiles out of big boys and replace them with Myrmidons in order to get my teams full of people. This hurts me on the attack, and it also hurts me on the defense. On the attack, I've cut all of my good Spitfire range-band guns except Orderos. Thus, while I would like to be able to use him as sort of a disposable fast attack team, if he dies, I've got nothing else left. On the defense, the Myrmidons are, they're obviously pretty decent with mimetism -6 and smoke, but they are very vulnerable to things like warbands and templates because they've only got 1 wound and they don't really have any good guns. This vulnerability becomes a chink in your armor that things with templates can exploit, and it's a chink in your armor that you wouldn't have if you were running something that were a lot closer to big boys. If I only had 1 Myrmidon, maybe it'd be okay, but I'm really just not enjoying having 3 of them. This is going to be something that bothers me throughout the league. Maybe not too much in this game because the French don't really have cheap fast attack warbands, but it is something that does bother me. Meanwhile, here is almost my opponent's list. Like, I threw in everything that I thought was there, and I thought I got everything, but I clearly haven't hit 300 points. So I'm missing something. I'm not really sure what I'm missing, but these are the things that I think are there. As with all French lists, you start with 4 chasseurs, in this case 2 forward observers and 2 mine layers. That pretty much makes sense because this mission features a lot of button pushing, so having the 2 forward observers to push buttons is nice. You've then got 2 metros as your lieutenant and lieutenant decoy. That might be the place where my points don't add up, but I know he had 2 metros, so maybe not. You've got Equipe Mirage 5. I really think you have to take Equipe Mirage 5 if you're being the French because you've got nothing else that is worth a ton of points and is good and stuff. That said, while Duroc in particular can be an absolute terror, he's not that much of an absolute terror against Steel Phalanx, especially against Steel Phalanx when I know he's coming. I can very easily watch a whole lot of back line with dudes that have multi-burst chain rifles and multi-burst nanopulsers. If Duroc shows up, I can probably kill him before he's able to do too much damage. Now, a more conventional Steel Phalanx list, which didn't have as many Myrmidons, would be even more safe against Duroc. So having all those Myrmidons does make me more vulnerable to his chain rifle +1 burst. But as it stands, obviously I would still rather be the guys with the Myrmidons than the guys with Duroc in this particular matchup. Margot is something that always honestly makes me kind of sad because she's 37 points and she pays a lot for things like having a really high ballistic skill, but without actually having a visor or mimetism or even a particularly good gun. So, I mean, you have to take Margot if you're going to take Equipe Mirage 5, but as we'll see in this game, what she's going to do when she shows up is just walk on the board and try to spec fire grenades at me, and I just don't think that's a particularly good use of 37 points. After that, you have 2 Zouaves. Zouaves are forward deployment sappers with dogged and access to these sniper rifles. Zouaves are something that I personally really like. If you're not familiar, the sapper rule gives you S3, means you're always in cover, and it gives you mimetism -3. So what these Zouaves are going to do is they're going to park somewhere in the open, and they're going to have cover there, and they're going to have mimetism there, and they're going to use their sniper rifles to take pot shots. Because they're dogged and have, I think, armor 2, they might even potentially last a little bit of a time in that role. So it's in that context that I find Zouaves to be a really interesting and cool and kind of fun piece. Unfortunately, I don't think they're very good. They are more expensive in points than the Acontecimento regular, who has a multi-sniper rifle, which is more dangerous than the Zouave's actual sniper rifle. Now, part of that reason is that they pay for forward deployment 8 inches without actually using it, but whether you made them cheaper or not, another part of the problem is that in the matchup against Steel Phalanx units are just going to be so highly tooled in comparison that Zouaves really struggle to keep up. I find Zouaves interesting and I'm happy to see them here, but I don't think that they're good. Units that I do think are good are these things that are in Group 2. The Metros with their Camo 1 use rifles and Panzerfausts are all, I think, really awesome. These guys are basically just Delamies, but unlike Delamies, they are regular and thus provide a regular order. Having a 12-point camouflaged regular order with a Panzerfaust is, in my opinion, actually really good. And I think if these guys were present in other armies other than, the French and Vanilla Ariadne, they would probably be something that people talk about a lot more. However, because they are present in Ariadne, which has lots of cheap orders, and in the French, which really doesn't have any, expensive, really good pieces, they're like an order battery, but it doesn't have anything to fuel. These dudes aren't going to do much throughout the course of the game, but I don't hate their presence here. I don't hate their units as an idea. They're just, unfortunately, not going to do all that much. Last up is Nauf. Nauf is a mercenary sniper with mimetism -3, MSV 1, and he has BS attack +1 burst on his sniper rifle and AP heavy pistol. And this dude is pretty much auto-include in the French. He's also pretty widely taken in armies that have access to him. The reason for this is that he is often the cheapest option for DZ to DZ gunfighting, especially against things like Phoenix or against things like tags. A multi-sniper rifle +1 burst is easily twice as good as a conventional sniper rifle. It is going to be able to inflict more hits on targets that you can, reliably beat, like tags, and it is going to be able to get you to have more burst against linked teams. Thus, in the context of this matchup with the French, I have to keep Phoenix safe from Nauf, or else Nauf could just, pop up and kill him. I mean, sure, Phoenix could win the face-to-face and kill Nauf too. It's only burst 3 versus burst 2, but it's nevertheless something that I really have to be careful of, and that's what Nauf provides for only 32 points. Nauf also is something that I don't really want to reveal either Atalanta or an Agema on in Aero. He simply has the burst advantage in order to kill those guys, even if I somehow manage to get smoke down, which I won't do because he can see through the smoke. So Nauf, seeing him in this list is no surprise at all. The only other thing that I would note is my opponent has put him in Group 2. I like that a lot. I'm a big fan of what I call the Group 2 hammer, which is where you have your long-range DZ to DZ gunfighter in Group 2 so that you can use only Group 2 orders to take out the tags and the TR bots, and that frees you up to do a Rambo run with everything else. There aren't any Rambos in French list, but, having Nauf there to clear the way, that's where Nauf wants to be anyway, so no shame about Nauf there. Lists out of the way, let's now talk about the mission. This is a Vol SC custom mission called Neural Net, and it is essentially the quintessential button push mission. There are 9 objectives in a 3x3 grid throughout the board, and basically the entirety of the mission is running specialists up to these terminals and making whip check in order to flip them. There really only are 2 complexities added on top of this. The first is that at the start of the game, you secretly record one of the terminals to be protected from the enemy. The idea is that after they pass a whip check on your secret terminal, you say, "Ha, you fell into my trap." That whip check actually fails, and they're not able to push the button until they've pushed every other button, which in practice means they never get to push that one. That particular detail may seem small, but actually has a fair bit of complexity. When I'm going first, for example, I often like to pick one of the midfield buttons that I know I'm going to push, and then I make that one my secret one so that my opponent can't take it back from me, as the game goes on. On the other hand, if you're going second, maybe you want to pick one of the 3 easy ones for your opponent so that when they try to push them, it doesn't count. Of course, they might know that that's what you're trying to do, so maybe they don't push the easy ones, which then means that maybe you actually want to pick one of the middle ones. I don't know how often that necessarily happens, but the point is that this whole encryption business is more interesting than it may seem at first glance. It doesn't affect the game all that much, but it is, kind of interesting and fun. The second quirk about this, which is a big deal, is what Vol SC calls the machine learning rule. What's going on here is that there's an AI that's living in the terminals, and as the game goes on, it gets better at keeping itself safe. From a game mechanics perspective, all that means is on the first turn of the game, you get +3 to your whip rolls, and on the last turn of the game, you get -3 to your whip rolls. As a consequence, you are strongly incentivized to push buttons early. That is awesome. With that single rule, this game, instead of being about, killing your opponent into the dirt and then pushing buttons at the end, or conversely, waiting till the last second and then stealing all of your opponent's buttons, all of that suddenly becomes way less viable because you need to push the buttons early. As any infiNity player can tell you, it's really easy to have a, whip 12 roll that just fails over and over and over again. Being able to, push the button with a bonus early on and being penalized for pushing it late incentivizes you to push buttons early instead of going out and killing things. And that pressure to do the mission instead of killing things, I think, is really good for the game, and it's really good for this mission. I think Neural Net is widely considered to be Vol SC's best mission, and I understand exactly where they're coming from on that one. It's worth playing, it's worth thinking about, and it's a good mission. Good job. Unfortunately, good job cannot be said of me in the context of taking pictures. I didn't get that many pictures, and so this is, I think, the earliest one that I have. We'll still be able to talk about the battle report itself, but I'll be relying on, trying to tell you where I think things were rather than being able to show you what they were. So for example, this is a picture after my opponent's first turn. What happened is I think he won the die roll and decided to go first, or maybe I won it and decided to choose deployment. I can't remember, but he got to go first, and this is what things look like basically at the end of his turn. To take you through his deployment, first and foremost, we have Metro, 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 Metro. These are all the camouflaged guys. You have a chasseur mine layer. Actually, I think that's the mine, and this is the chasseur. You have another chasseur mine layer, and I think this is the mine. You have, this is a chasseur forward observer, and up here is a chasseur forward observer that actually started, I think, back here, but through the course of the mission has like run up to this position and put a mine down here. Other than that, you have a Zouave here. Remember, they're sappers, so they get cover, and what he's doing is watching this long lane of fire. You have another sapper here doing the same thing. Metro here, Metro here. I keep Mirage 5 is off the board, and then last you have Nauf. Nauf was my opponent's withheld piece. Nauf got put down, I think, here, and what he did is he basically junked this flash pulse bot, ran over to this position. I had another flash pulse bot here. He junked that one too, and then he decided to go prone and play it safe, having, cleared out my arrow pieces. Since we are talking about my opponent's turn at the same time as deployment, I guess what I will say is I think what happened is this chasseur forward observer ran up in this direction after the arrow pieces had been cleared and tried to push buttons, and I guess probably just got unlucky and failed to push the buttons along the way. It's also possible that these got pushed and we forgot to change them. I don't really remember that detail specifically, but what we can see here is that the chasseur has ended up in this position, having put a mine down, but none of the buttons have been pressed. And that I do recall as being the end state after his first turn. Oh, by the way, the reason that he's over here is that this is basically where I have put my link with Machaon and Phoenix, and this mine is going to, try to bottle them down a little bit. Next, we have this picture, which happens to be actually at the end of my first turn, so some things have happened here, but I can also use it to talk about my deployment and what I did on my first turn. When I was deploying, I know I'm against the French. I know that it is very, very, very likely that a Keep Mirage 5 is coming, and I know that if I'm not careful to watch my DZ edge, I am going to get killed by Dirac. I do have 2 hidden deployment pieces, and I do want those hidden deployment pieces to be able to take pot shots on Dirac if he shows up, but I can't rely only on them because Dirac has total immunity. Hand in hand with this, I also suspect that Nauf is coming, so I kind of want my hidden deployment pieces to, be in places where I can be cheeky against Nauf. And in particular, what I did is I put a flash pulse bot here, and I had Atalanta in hidden deployment right behind it, thinking that I would reveal her and kill Nauf, but when he actually went to take the shot on my flash pulse bot, I was like, wait a second, he's just going to blow Atalanta, just kill her straight dead. And even if he ignores the flash pulse, maybe it hits, maybe it misses, but it's just stunned. It doesn't really matter. So the last moment I chicken out of revealing Atalanta, but that is where I put her, and the thinking was I'd be able to, shoot Nauf. In terms of my teams, though, what I basically do is I take Oideros, Akmon, and a Myrmidon. I put them over here. This is where they ended up after the first turn, not where they started. Where they started was, I think, back here, behind this thing, really trying to watch the entirety of this DZ section so that if Dirac shows up, I can nanopulsar him. Likewise, I had my other team positioned over here. I did not have Phoenix this far out on ARO duty because I was worried about Nauf. I think he was maybe here or maybe here watching like that lane or something like that. But what I have done that I definitely did do is I was extremely careful to put, Myrmidons and Myrmidons all watching this back edge and then this side here as well with those nanopulsars in case Dirac decided to show up. I'm especially concerned that Dirac could really just kill Machaon if I tried to, nanopulsar him and then he double chain ruffles me. So I got to keep Machaon, my lieutenant, safe. Other than that, for deployment, I had a flash pulse bot here, which Nauf killed. This flash pulse bot I did put there. Nauf knocked it out, but as you can see, I have fixed him. I have a net rod here. I have another net rod here. And then up in this corner is the baggage bot. And then I think back here, maybe right here, I don't exactly remember, but the Agima missile launcher is up there in that building. Anyway, to talk about my turn, as you recall, my opponent didn't push any buttons on his first turn. He just junked some flash pulse bots and then ran a chasseur up to this corner. So my job is basically kill the chasseur. While I'm at it, kill the Zouaves if I can, and then push a button. Turns out that's not that hard. I use this team to go ahead and discover the chasseur. It's a little risky. I have to stay more than 8 inches away because I don't want to get hit by the flamethrower, but I do manage to kill it. Likewise, the Zouaves are back here in the corner, and I think I just get within 32 inches and shoot them with Phoenix, and that's pretty much that. Phoenix is only burst 3, but his Zouave only has a sniper rifle, so if I lose the face-to-face, it's not that big of a deal. On the other hand, you know, Mimetism -6 is a hell of a drug and fire is super dangerous, and I think he just kills the Zouave in one go. This Zouave, on the other hand, was kind of annoying. It was kind of locking down these guys. So they did run out and fix the bot, and I wanted to run up and try to push a button, but the Zouave was in the way. So what I do instead is I throw smoke, reveal Atalanta to kill the Zouave, and then I come back into this position. Being in this position, I'm actually being a little cheeky. She, you'll notice, is prone. So what my opponent is going to have to do with Nauf, if he wants to kill Atalanta, he's actually going to have to walk Nauf over to here and then actually completely kill the Flash Pulse bot before he can shoot Atalanta. He can do it. It's just going to cost him orders, and if he's spending all of his orders walking Nauf over into a dumb position, he's not doing something more dangerous, and I think I'm okay with that use of Atalanta. Plus, BS-18, she might win the face-to-face. Who knows? Anyway, here's how things look at the end of my turn 1. I've pushed 1 button. I might have tried more. I don't really remember. I've killed one of his chasseurs. I've killed his aero pieces, and I'm in a really solid defensive position myself. And here is what things look like at the end of my opponent's turn 2. As we can see, he has taken a Foxtrot forward observer and managed to push this button and push this button. The forward observer has ended up here. I think he was trying to push the center button and failed, ran out of orders, and decided to go into marker state. Meanwhile, we can see that Atalanta is not dead over here, as I thought would happen, but Margot is on the board in this position. I think what happened is he moved Margot into Group 2, and then used the Group 2 orders to move Margot onto the board, and then just blast me with Spec-Fire grenades. That's not, like, the dumbest idea against Steel Phalanx, especially because I've got, you know, Myrmidon, and if either of those guys go down, you know, that's my link broken, and Duroc shows up, and that's bad. But just because something's not bad doesn't mean it's good, you know? And part of the problem here is that I've got 6th Sense, I've got decent enough armor, and, you know, Spec-Fire's at a pretty big penalty, and so it's not hard to imagine that it just doesn't do much, and I think that's what happens. Not much happens. This is actually the last screenshot I took, and I think it's because the game is pretty much over at this point, or very close to being over. The reason for that is that I think this is my opponent's last specialist. For whatever reason, he had somebody run up this way, which I think was a chasseur forward observer and not push any buttons. And so now, after killed that guy, I've now also able to kill this one. And if I kill this one, he just can't push any more buttons, and that's that. So that is literally my entire goal for my turn, and it is something I can accomplish. I think I use these guys, and I run out into this position, and it actually takes a while because of mimetism, because of cover, because I'm not in a pure link, and I do fail to discover at least once, but in the end, I am able to discover it, I reveal it, I kill it. Having killed it, I am able to push some buttons, and having pushed some buttons, I now have more buttons than he does, and he can't even, like, take them back, and that's pretty much the game. So all told, you know, it was a pretty one-sided game. I do feel like going after his specialists was a strategically good decision on my part, and that risking his specialists was, you know, a sort of a strategic misplay on my opponent's part. But at the same time, the French compared to Steel Phalanx is it's just a non-comparison. Steel Phalanx is just so much stronger. And it's worth thinking about, you know, the video that VolSC made about meta warping whatevers in the context of this matchup. I'm not running the big boy list, but I am including units like Machaon and like Phoenix and like Odoros, who belong in that big boy list because they're really, really, really tough and hard to beat. And because, you know, I'm running those guys, the poor French just don't have a way to actually attack me in any sort of practical sense. Like, yes, Nauf can junk flash pulse bots and force me to keep my head down, but as we're seeing here, that doesn't really matter because once my head is down, what's he going to do? He could run out and push buttons, and I think he did that, but it would have been trivial for me to steal the buttons back from him. And, you know, even if he pushes buttons or not, he then has to try to attack me by putting a mine here and threatening to flamethrower me as I walk by. That's not that threatening. That's not that dangerous, and I have all the power in the world in order to deal with that problem. Because I'm taking these busted units like Phoenix, like Machaon, like Oideros, my opponent has no game. He has no play. All he can do is he can, put mines down and hope that I fail my dodge, but I'm still dodging on 13s because 6 cents. Or he could take Margot, who is a quite expensive drop troop, and walk around and use her as basically a dollar store artillery piece, lobbing grenades at me that don't even do anything. And even if they did, you'd put Phoenix NWI so I can fix him later? It's a non-starter. It's no play. PumaDriftCat is being punished for the army mismatch of what's happened here, and he cannot play better in order to get around that. There's less interactivity between the two of us because of this power level mismatch. Because Steel Phalanx is busted good and the French are, let's be honest, kind of bad. I think that power level mismatch was bad for this game. I think it is bad for infiNity, and I honestly don't think it is something that is restricted only to competitive play. Phoenix in a link is really oppressive. And that's true if you are me now, and it's also true if you're me like 3 years ago who didn't really know how to play infiNity that well. So to me, the takeaway of this battle report is that it is important to address balance issues because balance issues make the game less interesting. And in my opinion, this effect is felt at all levels of play, not just the higher levels. That's hardly a spicy take. I know Vol just made his video about the meta and that sort of thing. I know there was that forum post, but I wanted to bring that up in the context of this battle report because I think this battle report shows it too. Hopefully you found it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you around.